An unprecedented collapse is shaking the United States, which has just suffered one of the most humiliating blows in its economic history. More than 120 nations, including powers like China, India, and Russia, have stopped purchasing American steel. What was once Donald Trump's promise to restore America's greatness has turned into the trigger of a chain reaction that jeopardizes not only the United States' foreign trade, but also global confidence in the dollar. While the White House becomes entangled in a consuming trade war, a new economic alliance emerges quietly from Eurasia, ready to redefine the rules of global power. How could an industrial superpower become an isolated supplier, even sidelined by its own allies? The explanation is as unsettling as it is true. When Trump launched his tariff offensive, he claimed it was the only way to protect American jobs. But instead of bringing factories back, his policies pushed the world to form an unprecedented anti-American bloc. From Canada to Japan, through India, Europe, and South Korea, the message was clear and forceful. The United States is no longer a reliable partner. Consequently, domestic consumption is plummeting. Families pay more and receive less, while the main emerging powers, China, Russia, and India, consolidate a power triangle with relentless effectiveness. This new alliance combines what the United States can no longer offer: young labor, strategic natural resources, and an industrial capacity capable of mass production. Meanwhile, Washington remains trapped in its own snare. How can investments in lithium mines in Central Asia be justified when factories in Ohio keep closing? Internal political pressure has turned any expansion attempt into electoral suicide. But that's not all. The numbers reveal a silent collapse. U.S. consumption growth has fallen from 4% to practically zero in less than 12 months. Prices for food, fuel, and basic goods have skyrocketed, while the value citizens receive continues to decline. On the international stage, the punishment is even harsher. India, once a strategic U.S. ally, now faces tariffs of up to 50% on key products. As a result, New Delhi has turned to Moscow and Beijing, strengthening its energy and trade alliance with the BRICS bloc. The recent image of the warm meeting between Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin is not just a diplomatic photo, but a symbol of a profound global reconfiguration. China provides infrastructure, Russia the resources, and India the workforce. Together, they are building a parallel economy that can survive without the dollar, without Wall Street, and without Washington's approval. However, the most humiliating blow to Washington did not come from its traditional rivals, but from those who were supposed to be its allies. Canada and Europe, historic pillars of NATO and transatlantic trade, have been hit by tariffs that harm their exports of steel, aluminum, and vehicles. Japan and South Korea face rising costs in microelectronics and maritime transport. Even traditionally moderate countries like Germany are beginning to look to Asia for trade stability. The message delivered is devastating. When loyalty is punished with tariffs, there is no incentive to maintain obedience. The cracks in U.S. leadership are no longer hidden. They are openly displayed. Foreign policy based on economic pressure is producing exactly the opposite of what it promised. Instead of strengthening Washington's hegemony, this strategy has pushed its allies closer to rising powers. On the other hand, the U.S. economy faces unprecedented internal pressure. Citizens demand greater national investment, yet the country lacks control over essential resources. Key minerals like lithium, copper, and uranium, needed to manufacture everything from circuits to combat aircraft, are being absorbed by China through strategic loans and infrastructure projects in Central Asia. This is where the real geopolitical game unfolds. China already controls more than 70% of global rare earth processing. Thanks to its logistical and financial power, it connects mines in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan directly to its factories, bypassing the dollar and Wall Street. All transactions are conducted in yuan and flow through Chinese corridors. The United States, in turn, cannot compete in speed, conditions, or trust. Emerging nations are aware of this. They prefer Chinese loans, even if smaller but immediate, over the bureaucratic demands of the IMF or the World Bank. This context reflects another symptom of decline. the progressive loss of the dollar as the central currency in global trade. For nearly 80 years, the dollar was the pillar of the world financial system, but now this is changing rapidly. Between January and June, China's trade with BRICS countries exceeded 6 trillion yuan, nearly $900 billion. The most surprising thing is not the volume, but the currency in which these transactions are conducted. Increasingly, transactions are carried out in yuan, leaving the dollar aside entirely. Adding to this is an even deeper trend. Central banks worldwide are increasing their gold and silver reserves to protect themselves against monetary volatility. In just 8 months, the dollar index dropped 10%, while the proportion of gold in global reserves reached 24%, the highest level in 30 years. Silver, meanwhile, rose more than 36% in just 1 year. It is not only about prices, but about trust. And trust, like steel, once corroded, never returns to what it was. While precious metals gain ground, American steel collapses. This symbol of North American industrial power is being displaced not only by its adversaries, but also by over 120 countries that have chosen to seek more reliable, less volatile, and above all, less politically influenced sources. The tariff policy not only made American steel more expensive, but turned it into a risky product, exposed to sanctions, litigation, and diplomatic retaliation. Nations that for decades purchased steel from the United States now look to India, China, or even Turkey. It is not just about cost, but about stability and predictability. The world is unwilling to pay the price of trade wars driven from Washington. In this new scenario, the BRICS bloc positions itself as the center of an alternative economic system. This is not a baseless theory, but a profound transformation backed by tangible investments, solid infrastructure, and well-thought strategic decisions. China provides capital, Russia supplies energy, and India offers highly skilled labor. Together, they are creating an ecosystem that does not depend on U.S. Congress approval nor IMF authorization. What worries strategists in Washington most is that this alliance is neither ephemeral nor a passing reaction, but a design meant to last for decades. What is called the Eurasian Triad encompasses not only production and trade, but also the financial and security spheres. It represents support against the instability of the Western Bloc and at the same time a path to growth without relying on the dollar or Federal Reserve rates. That is why, while American steel piles up unused in warehouses, the yuan shines on international market screens. And while foundries in Pennsylvania reduce their work shifts, lithium mines in Central Asia receive Chinese machinery and unconditional financing. But this story does not end there. The United States, pressured by its own voters, cannot make strategic decisions without paying a political cost. Imagine, for a moment, a president, regardless of party, announcing a $3 billion investment in Uzbekistan while Detroit continues to lose jobs. The controversy would be immediate, and indignation would spread throughout the country. This internal limitation represents the greatest strategic obstacle for the United States at a time when it needs to strengthen its international presence. In that geopolitical vacuum, China acts as an emerging power would, conquering spaces, signing agreements, consolidating supply routes, and gaining allies through financing. Meanwhile, in the heart of Eurasia, uranium, copper, lithium, and rare earth deposits are being connected to Beijing's logistical network. All this occurs just as the world moves toward an economy based on clean energy, advanced batteries, and sustainable technologies. Every element of this transition, from solar panels to electric vehicles, depends on these minerals, and China is quietly securing them one by one. Washington is aware of this reality. It cannot compete in either speed or scope. That's why alarms are starting to sound from within. The White House is considering declaring silver a critical mineral, which would allow it to intervene directly to accumulate reserves and avoid a shortage that would be catastrophic. However, there is a problem. Increasing domestic production is not only costly, but also slow. Supply chains are already in China's hands, and opening new mines requires years of investment, environmental permits, and technologies that many in the United States seem to have forgotten. Meanwhile, time moves on. Silver leasing rates on the London market, which hovered near zero for years, have increased by more than 2 percentage points. Traders and manufacturers are withdrawing this metal from stocks as if it were gold, because in an electrified world, silver is not a luxury but a necessity. It is used to make microchips, batteries, solar panels, and high-precision components. And if supply decreases, prices will inevitably rise. When prices begin to rise, inflation inevitably returns. And with inflation back, the Federal Reserve is forced to raise interest rates. This causes the fragile financial structure to wobble again. But something even more significant is happening far from traditional financial centers. Central banks worldwide are increasing their investments in gold. In recent months, gold acquisitions by these entities have reached levels not seen since the 1990s. This move sends a clear message. Countries no longer blindly trust the dollar. They prefer to protect their wealth in tangible and real assets that cannot be affected by sanctions or political manipulations. Additionally, more and more international transactions are being conducted in yuan or local currencies, indicating a gradual but firm shift in the global monetary system. The dollar, which for decades was the only valid means for world trade, is gradually being displaced. Even in sensitive sectors like armaments, the United States is losing ground. For example, India, which for 20 years had signed contracts worth over $20 billion for American weapons, now acquires less than 9% of its military equipment from Washington. Russia maintains a 40% share, but the real surprise is Israel, which is rapidly gaining ground. With current tariffs and geopolitical tensions, it is almost impossible for giants like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, or Raytheon to secure new multi-billion-dollar contracts in Asia. While the United States loses opportunities, China consolidates its influence. The air routes between India and China, which were closed for years, have been reactivated, showing the interest of both governments in restoring not only trade but also human ties. Because trading without trust is not trade. It is simply a gamble, and for many nations, betting on the United States is too risky, unstable, and costly. As American factories slow down their activity and ports lose contracts, the global balance is shifting. Globalization no longer revolves around Washington, but is being reconfigured around Eurasia. Beneath the steppes and mountains of Central Asia lie the most coveted resources of the 21st century: copper, lithium, uranium, and rare earths, essential elements to manufacture smartphones, electric vehicles, fighter jets, and satellites. For years, these regions remained forgotten, without infrastructure or technology. But now, Beijing has taken on the role of guardian of these treasures. China not only has the necessary capital but also a clear vision. It is creating a parallel economic system that spans from mines to factories. Through ports and data centers, all outside the reach of the dollar, without relying on the Western financial system or seeking Washington's approval. At the heart of this silent transformation, American steel has become a symbol of what was once an industrial power that believed it could impose its rules through market force, but ended up isolated by its own political arrogance. While officials in the United States try to preserve the image of the dollar, gold and silver are reclaiming their place as true stores of value. Silver has reached a value above $0 per ounce, something that hadn't happened in over a decade. In just a couple of years, its price has increased by more than 130%. This is not simple speculation, but a clear sign that the current system is reaching its limit. The dominance of the dollar, the power of tariffs, and the influence of the Federal Reserve are beginning to crumble before a world no longer willing to follow those rules. Faith in the U.S. financial system is not sustained by promises, but is now measured in bullion, and central banks are very clear about this. What we see is not just a temporary rise or another economic cycle crisis, but a transformation toward a new financial scheme, where precious metals carry more weight than words, and where pacts between India, Russia, and China are more decisive than any sanctions imposed from Washington. The old order is being replaced, not through armed conflict but through supply chains, strategic financing, and mineral resources. a system in which the dollar no longer sets the rules, where the White House has lost prominence, and where American steel, once a symbol of power, lies forgotten, unwanted, rusting as the world turns toward a new center of influence. Now, the key question is for you. Is the United States really losing its place as the global economic leader? The rise of silver and the decline of the dollar could mean the closing of a cycle or the beginning of a silent empire led by China, India, and Russia. Share your viewpoint in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next episode of This Global Change.